Thank you all for coming this morning. It gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome the Speaker of the Iraqi Council of Representatives, Osama Al Nujaifi, who took up that august position on the 11th of November 2010. In the March 2010 elections, Dr. Al Nujaifi received the third highest personal vote behind Nouri al-Maliki and the leader of his own coalition, IISS. And so what we're going to do today is hear Dr. Al Nujaifi speak for about half an hour on the future of democracy in Iraq after the elections. Then we'll have questions and answers. All of this is on the record. We'll have simultaneous translation. But if you can ask your questions in English so the rest of the audience can understand, and we save our Herculean translator the task of doing both. So without further ado, Dr. Al Nujaifi.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm extremely happy to be here visiting the United Kingdom, a country that has long been a friend of Iraq and the Iraqi people. And I'd also like to thank you on behalf of the parliamentary delegation which I am leading in this visit, in order to talk about the situation, the current prevalent situation in Iraq, the challenges that lie ahead of us in constructing and building a democratic state, a state built on universal values of democracy and the rule of the people, as well as one that sees the respect of human rights and international law. We must start off by mentioning that Iraq and Iraqis have suffered greatly, and particularly in the previous regime, which saw the rule of the one party, in fact the rule of the one individual, which had the country enter into military escapades which ruined not only people but ruined the infrastructure. It created a society that was divided amongst itself. It posed Iraq as a country that was feared and that intimidated its neighbors and regional countries, and led to a state of absolute brokerage. So change came to Iraq and the Iraqis through a clear and overt and comprehensive military occupation and force, and government was formed and structured under such an umbrella and under such conditions. And unfortunately, the main considerations of the formation of the first remnants and the first traces of government were based on sectarian considerations more than any other, something that the majority of the Iraqis neither wished for or aspired to. But that is essentially how the very first elements of the post-occupation government emerged. And that became, unfortunately, the map upon which every other government and every subsequent government came to hold power. This policy, unfortunately, created deep and quite considerable divisions, both within the political element as well as society as a whole. It seems that ultimately government became a booty that had to be divided according to shares, and part of the implications of this structure was that one segment of Iraqi society was blamed. It is as though it was blamed for the crimes committed by the former regime. An entire state collapses, when an entire system collapses, what happens is that you will find naturally that many powers, regional as well as international, they become involved, they interfere. Iraq's borders were absolutely penetrable, allowing many intelligence agencies from various countries to enter freely, allowing also violent terrorists to also enter freely, leaving Iraq as a battlefield of many powers, and unfortunately the fuel and the victims of this battle between all these elements were the Iraqi people themselves. in the long shadow of this sectarian conflict that prevailed, and because of foreign agendas that were playing out in Iraq, as well as the mismanagement of the political system and the political structure from the very start, as well as the baggage that Iraq and the Iraqis were carrying from the former era, the whole situation became extremely complex. And under these circumstances, it was decreed and it was decided that a constitution would be drafted. And unfortunately, what's happened were two things. First of all, that all the complexities and all the contradictions and all the fears and apprehensions of the time were poured into the process of writing that particular constitution, and also that the constitution was given 2 months to be drafted. And it becomes absurd when you realize that the 2 months to organize a whole state and society's life for many, many years, possibly decades, to come in a country like Iraq, which was renowned as being the very first land where laws were written and constitutions were drafted. Even in the post-constitution era, it became apparent that the constitution itself was a problem. Not only because as a result of it being drafted so rashly and so hastily, even the parties to the draft, or who were assigned the responsibility of drafting the constitution, they themselves started to talk about the severe problems, the considerable elements within the constitution that allow for economic problems, for political problems, the inability of the constitution to actually manage or to regulate the progress of Iraq as a political structure and as a society. People who were party to drafting the constitution, they spoke of various minefields and even potential dividing elements and considerations. All this appeared with the beginning or the start of the process of actually implementing the constitution in real life. So we're left today with the reality that the constitution has not been completely implemented. Every element within Iraqi state and society, they take from the constitution what suits their own interests, whether they be a political party, whether they be an element within Iraqi society, whether they be a particular sect or such. And the fact is, many constitutional laws have yet to be ratified, have yet to be have yet to pass. Indeed, there are some items within the Constitution that make it virtually impossible for any amendment of the Constitution. For instance, the Article 142 talks or states that in order to amend or the such, there needs to be a referendum in which 50% plus one, a simple majority, would have the amendment pass. Yet there is a proviso and a condition that 3 provinces of Iraq's provinces have to, unless 3 provinces object to this by a 2/3 vote, which makes it virtually impossible to carry out any amendment. There are now serious attempts from various elements of the political structure in order to achieve a sense of political normality and stability, in order to have a national agenda prevail rather than a sectarian or nationalistic agenda, in order to have the human rights being observed and respected, that law governs overall equally. There is such a will. But unfortunately, that will collides with the political realities of a few who have taken possession of particularly influential posts and have their interests served and the such. Those will find it very difficult, and they will fight possibly to the end in order not to abdicate or not to relinquish such influence and such power. And there is also the corruption mafias that seem to spread through the establishment like an octopus. These have benefited greatly from the sectarian conflict, from the absence of certain legislations, from various nationalist agendas and the such, and those mafias are the biggest impediment to political reform and to any political progress being made. We face a great challenge, and the challenge is how to re-establish balance throughout Iraqi society and the political structure. How we can re-establish balance throughout all the apparatus and the elements of the state, of the armed forces and the intelligence. The challenge is how to establish true and real and profound partnerships, which allows us all to stand and to confront the elements and the powers that wish to destruct. It's also important, and one of the greatest challenges that we face is to prevent foreign intervention and foreign interference. This is possible and extremely likely, and is happening, due to the fact that the internal structure of Iraq remains fragile. Also, the challenge of building and forming a powerful, a strong, a capable armed forces, which is efficient at protecting the borders, that could send a very clear message that we are capable of defending ourselves, defending our people, our nation, as well as defending our riches. There are many agreements that have been signed, and there are signs and there are elements that are conducive to reform, but unfortunately these have yet to come to fruition and have yet to be implemented. There is a clear vision. The greatest challenge of all is to establish a democratic system and a democratic reality. For that reality will be conducive to the best interests of all Iraqis. We need the values of democracy, considering the peculiarities and particulars of Iraq. We need the respect of human rights. We need to protect our minorities. We need the law of the land to rule over all equally. And we need the essential elements of proper governance that will also benefit all equally. For this we need, and this is imperative, we need a just, a strong and an independent judiciary. The security and armed forces and establishing those according to the balances stipulated in the Constitution are also vital for the stability of Iraq and its people. We must have those forces away from any particular narrow specific agendas, but all to do with the national interest of Iraq. Those forces must be totally independent from politics and totally independent from the influence of politicians. And they must never, ever be used by any element within Iraq to carry out narrow agendas rather than the national agenda for which it should serve. The constitutional balance, the balance that is stipulated in the Constitution is indeed there to protect the country, its future, and to protect the people. And another matter which is also very important and something that we pursue with vigor is the national identity, the Iraqi national identity. Finally, the issue of the economy and Iraq's mineral riches. Oil is our greatest asset, and it is the element that, with which we can unify all elements of Iraqi society, and it could be the protector of the stability of the country. If and only if the necessary laws and legislations were ratified, this particular dossier was dealt with in an appropriate and adequate manner, and that the oil sector was protected properly. Iraq, as you all know, is considered the second largest oil-producing country in the world. Many the oil reserves, that has oil reserves, and many studies and research actually mention that it is it comes out first. It comes at the top list in terms of its oil reserves. The studies show that Iraq has 350 billion barrels of oil, which allows for another 100 years of oil production, where Iraq will be at the top of the oil-producing countries. If we deal with this particular dossier in an appropriate manner, this will be an element which will protect, which will secure the stability of all Iraqis. We have to send a very clear message that all Iraqis are partners to this particular wealth, equally, and that they will all come in for the rewards of this if we administer it in the proper way. But if we are to fail in doing so, then there will be great problems. And very finally, I must mention the Arab Spring, which is a culmination of popular movements throughout the Arab region, in which people aspire to freedom and aspire to democracy. These are legitimate movements and legitimate aims, and we support those movements and their aspirations. But we also warn that they must never divert from the path of attaining that consensus, that unified approach towards freedom and democracy. They must never divert from their path and go down the path of sectarian conflict, or a conflict that would lead to the breaking up of their countries and their societies. We saw, for instance, what happened in Egypt a couple of days ago, and we recognize and acknowledge the great challenges in Syria. Now, these have obviously a direct impact on Iraq, and will have quite a negative impact on Iraq if they did transgress into sectarian or divert into sectarian conflicts. So we hope that these movements will attain their ambition and their goal of finding freedom and democracy, but it must be within the staying away from any potential descent into sectarian conflict or divisions. I might have overseen some important points, but I hope that these will be covered in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank the speaker for, I think, a very frank and insight into the potential evolution of Iraqi politics going forward. I'll now throw the floor open to questions. If you catch my eye and wait for the microphone, then stand up and say who you are and ask your questions in English. Thank you.
This infringes and violates Iraq's sovereignty. There is no doubt about that. the government was not quiet. It wasn't silent on these incidents, but it might have been late in issuing a formal response. And this isn't something which is new. It's something that has been going on for a few years. Parliament spoke out clearly and condemned the bombings. And during my recent visit to Iran, I spoke in every meeting to my Iranian counterparts about this particular incident, and they gave various explanations. And the government, the Iraqi government, also has a particular opinion on these incidents. In terms of, essentially, there is, if I may just check my notes. Basically, these attacks, these bombardments, they targeted Kurdish opposition groups. Some of them labeled as terrorist groups, and they are well known. They are PJAK and the PKK, the Kurdish. I don't get the official name right now, but the PKK, which operates within Turkish territories. And the explanation. The explanation given is that by the government is that we don't have an adequate military force that can actually deal with these groups. We don't have an adequate force that can actually protect Iraq's borderline, or to pursue these groups, or to prevent them from coming in, and that to an extent is true. But there is no question that since it does infringe on Iraq's sovereignty, then the government it's incumbent upon the government to do something. There are certain negotiations and there are bilateral committees that have been set with Turkey and with Iran to discuss these issues. And the Iraqi government asked the Kurdish provincial government to send or to allow it to send forces that would deal with the borders, but there was no positive response, and that is in line with the constitution that allows the provisional government to do so. However, with the Iranian side, there has been an agreement, and the bombing has stopped. With Turkey, the operations of the Turkish army continue. And I recently had a conversation with the Turkish Prime Minister about this particular matter, and his response was that in regards with the oil law, there have been attempts since 2007 to actually ratify this law, and there were 3 drafts of the law that were presented and presented before the Parliament in various times, none of which were implemented, due to deep political divisions over various details. The main problem, the crux of the issue is that there are 2 schools of thought, 2 theories here. One that see that it's imperative that the authority lie with the federal government, and that it is the federal government that has the authority to ratify, to sign contracts, and so on. And this is based upon various interpretations of elements within, or articles within the Constitution. The other school of thought is that it is vital that the provinces, particularly the oil-producing provinces, are party to the considerations of any contracts or any such agreements. That is done according to a particular vote structure, sitting around the table with all the provinces being represented. My own opinion is that so essentially there are 2 schools of thought: either to gather the authority at the center, or to basically disperse authority so that the provinces are partners to the decision-making process. And my own opinion is the latter. And there are various elements within the constitution that also support this particular view. At this moment of time, we have 5 drafts of the oil law, 3 of which were the ones that I spoke about since 2007. There is also a proposed law that Parliament is considering, and the government is about to produce a bill regarding this issue. We're trying to seek a way out. We're trying to seek a position where both views can be accommodated somehow, and we're still hopeful that this is possible.
أما موضوع محاسبة الحكومة ولماذا لا يحظى الشعب إلا بساعات قليلة من الكهرباء بعد إدارة يعني طويلة لهذا القطاع ومن دون مساءلة ومحاسبة، فأنا فعلا أقول أنه هناك تقصير في هذا الجانب، هناك إخفاق حكومي في إدارة هذا الملف، وأسباب الإخفاق هو الفساد الذي يسيطر على هذا القطاع. وحصلت تغييرات كثيرة في إدارة هذه الوزارة بفترات متعاقبة، آخرها الوزير الذي استقال قبل شهر أو شهرين.
For the third question, in regards with holding the government accountable, and the example that you cited pertaining to the electricity, the very few hours of electricity that the Iraqis have and enjoy every day, after all this time and without any traces of accountability, there is no question that there is an incredible amount of shortcoming. In fact, there is a government failure in handling this particular dossier, and the main reason is corruption, because this particular sector is rife with corruption. There have been several changes in the ministry. Only a month or 2 ago, the minister resigned, and over subsequent weeks, 2 of his deputies also resigned after serving for 7 years. And only yesterday, a new electricity minister was appointed, and his appointment was approved and ratified by Parliament. The problem is that this particular sector has links with both financial as well as political structures. And there are also, unfortunately, several considerable and substantial corruption mafias, which I mentioned in my presentation. And this essential sector was not given the importance and the attention that it deserved. We have an experience in having our electricity structure down back in 1991, in the aftermath of the Iraq-Kuwait war, in which the electricity stations were targeted specifically, and the entire structure was damaged. That structure was up and running within 6 months, and with 100% Iraqi hands and Iraqi capabilities. So the Iraqis themselves, they are fully capable of handling this sector and bringing it up to an efficient level. But they have to be given the chance to do so. And there has to be a transparent and a clean administration of this particular sector that has nothing to do with ratifying contracts or signing agreements or the such. And it also must be away from all the sectarian conflicts and political quarrels and the such, and enjoys the support of Parliament so that it can carry out its duties. But there can be no question that this is a great area of failure.
Thank you. With apologies to the 3 questioners at the back, we've now strayed quite a lot over time, and I think that's credit to our speaker. I'd like to thank Dr. Al Nujaifi for taking the time at the beginning of his official visit to come and visit us at the International Institute for Strategic Studies and be so frank and detailed in the answering of your questions. Thank you very much.